It carves stone like breath on glass, silent, sacred, and not of this world. What if I told you that the most legendary cutting tool in history left no mark, made no sound, and worked without a single touch? Not a blade, not a laser, but a force of divine precision. Forged not in fire, but in legend, this wasn't a human invention. It was a whisper from the cosmos. This is the Shamir, a creature, a concept, a cosmic mystery. And today we follow its trail through Jewish mysticism, Christian esoterica, and the forgotten rites of Western occultism to ask a haunting question. What happens when humans are given the power to create like gods? In the vast canon of Jewish mystical thought, few entities bridge the realms of divine creativity and sacred construction as compellingly as the Shamir. Neither holy creature nor tool, the Shamir exists at the blurred boundaries of matter and spirit, tradition and myth, presence and power. The earliest and most authoritative mentions of this enigmatic being occur within the rabbinic corpus, primarily in the Babylonian Talmud, the Midrashim, and the Mishnaic tradition, where the Shamir is introduced not merely as a marvel, but as a theological necessity. The Babylonian Talmud, in Tractate Gittin 68a, records a remarkable episode involving King Solomon's ambitious efforts to build the first temple in Jerusalem without violating divine injunctions against the use of iron. This scriptural interdiction posed a practical challenge. How can materials as hard as stone be cut or shaped without resorting to violence? In response to this dilemma, the Talmud recounts a narrative of extraordinary theological and magical complexity. Solomon, unable to locate the Shamir through natural means, resorts to summoning supernatural entities. He captures both a male and a female demon, and interrogates them regarding the Shamir's whereabouts. Even they, embodiments of hidden knowledge and arcane power, confess ignorance. It is not until Solomon apprehends Asmodeus, the prince of demons, that he is directed toward the elusive Shamir. This detail alone illustrates the Shamir's profound significance. Even the highest-ranking spirits of darkness are not its custodians. It belongs instead to a separate, divinely protected order. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot 5:6 offers another tantalizing glimpse into the Shamir's origins. There it is listed among the 10 miraculous items created at twilight on the eve of the first Sabbath, a temporal threshold between the days of active creation and the day of divine rest. That the Shamir was created during this liminal moment is deeply symbolic. Twilight, a fusion of day and night, order and mystery, represents transition. In being forged at this exact moment, the Shamir inherits the essence of both creation and cessation. It is a thing of power and stillness, of function and faith. This temporal designation infuses the Shamir with metaphysical gravity. It was not merely made for utility, but inscribed into the very architecture of sacred time. Rabbinic accounts describe the Shamir with striking precision. Though said to be no larger than a grain of barley, it is credited with the capacity to cut through the hardest substances known to antiquity, including diamond. However, its power is not kinetic. The Shamir does not bore nor scrape. It transforms by presence. This quality situates it closer to mystical forces than to mechanical tools. Indeed, some descriptions suggest that merely being held near a material caused it to cleave apart, suggesting an intense, almost radiation-like energy. The earliest applications of the Shamir are associated with the construction of priestly garments, particularly the high priest's breastplate. According to Midrashic accounts, Moses faced the problem of engraving the names of the 12 tribes onto 12 precious stones without damaging them, since traditional engraving tools would fracture or degrade the gems. The Shamir was the solution. The text describes a meticulous process. First, names were inscribed using ink, then the Shamir was passed over the stones, at which point the writing penetrated their surfaces. This process was described as effortless and exacting, as though the Shamir's essence recognized and obeyed divine instruction. Yet the Shamir's potency was not without peril. Its gaze, according to legend, could unravel the molecular bonds of any substance it encountered. As such, extreme measures were needed to contain it. The Midrash describes how the creature or entity was entrusted to a bird, the hoopoe, also known as the mountain cock or woodcock, an avian guardian divinely tasked with protecting this powerful object. This bird would store the shamir in a carefully assembled encasement, first wrapping it in a woolen cloth surrounded by barley grains, and then enclosing it within a lead container. Lead, uniquely immune to the shamir's effects, was the only material capable of withstanding its gaze. This elaborate method of containment, organic layers shielding an intense divine presence, provides a metaphorical reflection of many mystical traditions in Judaism. The divine is not to be wielded directly, lest it consume the wielder. Instead, it must be mediated, veiled, and approached with profound reverence. In this way, the shamir becomes not only a divine implement, but a symbol of mystical knowledge itself, powerful, transformative, but hazardous if mishandled or misunderstood. As Jewish thought evolved, the shamir's symbolic resonance only deepened. In some Kabbalistic interpretations, the shamir was likened to divine will manifesting in material form, a projection of the divine name itself, capable of shaping the world in silence. The notion of creation through divine utterance, and God said, "Let there be," finds its analog in the shamir's capacity to shape without friction or violence. Here, speech or even intention becomes a tool of creation. The mystics thus understood the shamir not as an oddity of ancient legend, but as a window into the architecture of sacred reality. It represents the idea that true divine power does not mutilate, but transforms, that sanctity requires restraint, and that the act of creation, when executed under divine ordinance, leaves no scar upon the world. This idea stood in stark contrast to the prevailing ethos of empire building through force, whether Egyptian, Babylonian, or Roman, and reaffirmed Judaism's emphasis on holiness through harmony, not dominance. In short, the shamir in Jewish mystical tradition is a theological enigma, a being or tool that fuses the miraculous with the mechanical, the mint with the monumental. It exists at the crossroads of legend, ritual, and metaphysics, carrying the weight of both scriptural command and mystical insight. It is not merely remembered for what it did, but revered for what it means, that divine creativity is subtle, sacred, and transcendent. The name Shamir is more than a designation for a mysterious entity. It is a linguistic vessel bearing layers of symbolic, theological, and cultural significance. In the Hebrew Bible, the term Shamir appears in various forms, with meanings ranging from thorn and adamant to diamond and hard stone. These polyvalent meanings encode the shamir with dualities that are not merely descriptive, but allegorical. From a philological perspective, shamir is derived from the Hebrew root shamar, meaning to guard or to protect, and is etymologically linked to sharpness or hardness. In Strong's Concordance, it is identified as a term used in multiple prophetic texts: Jeremiah 17:1, Ezekiel 3:9, Zechariah 7:12, where it symbolizes both impervious hardness and moral intransigence. In these contexts, shamir refers not to a creature, but to a substance so unyielding that it resists even divine instruction, often representing the hardened hearts of Israel. Thus, before the Talmudic shamir even appeared as a mystical worm, the word already resonated with imagery of resistance, permanence, and dangerous beauty. The linguistic irony is potent. The very term used to describe an obstinate heart is also the name of a divine tool used for sacred inscription. This inversion signals a deeper theological tension, the line between divine resistance and divine resilience, between obstructive hardness and sanctifying sharpness. Just as the shamir carves into precious stones without destroying them, so too must divine wisdom carve into the human soul without shattering it. The symbolic duality also finds expression in broader mythological frameworks. The motif of an object or entity capable of cutting without harm, inscribing without damage, appears in cultures far beyond the borders of ancient Israel. In certain Zoroastrian traditions, for instance, sacred tools and names are said to possess a transformative purity that repels evil without engaging it directly. The barsum, a ritual bundle of twigs used in Zoroastrian worship, though not destructive, functions symbolically to channel divine order. Like the Shamir, it embodies a spiritual tool that mediates divine will through material form. Similarly, in ancient Egyptian cosmology, the notion of shaping the world through divine words, heka, or sacred utterance, bears thematic resemblance. The god Pos is said to have conceived the world through thought and brought it into being through speech. This resonance is striking when considered alongside Jewish mystical interpretations of the Shamir as a kind of living glyph of the divine name. Powerful not by motion, but by presence, by vibration, by essence. In Christian and Western esoteric traditions, these symbolic undercurrents are inherited and transformed. The figure of Solomon, so central to the Shamir narrative in rabbinic literature, becomes a magus in later apocryphal and occult texts. The Testament of Solomon, a pseudepigraphal work likely composed between the 1st and 5th centuries CE, reimagines the biblical king as a demonologist and architect who harnesses supernatural entities to complete the temple. While the Shamir is not directly mentioned, the motif of sacred construction without violence, through command over divine or infernal forces, carries its imprint. In the 17th century Lemegeton, or Lesser Key of Solomon, Solomon is portrayed wielding divine authority to control demons and spirits to complete mystical works. The absence of the Shamir by name is less important than the thematic continuity. Divine knowledge externalized into a tool or method that surpasses human limitations. In these texts, the Shamir is transmuted from a specific object into a general archetype, the esoteric technology of sacred making. The influence of the Shamir may even be traced into Islamic mysticism, where Solomon or Suleiman is revered not only as a prophet but as a master of the jinn. In the Quran, Solomon commands birds, winds, and jinn to build palaces and temples, Surah Saba 34:12. While the Shamir is not named, the motif of supernatural cooperation in sacred architecture reemerges, echoing the rabbinic themes of non-violent, divinely authorized craftsmanship. Within Kabbalistic thought, these linguistic and symbolic threads are woven into the fabric of the Sephirotic system, particularly in the Sephirah of Yesod. Positioned as the conduit between the upper Sephirot and the material realm, Yesod functions as the foundation upon which divine energy is shaped into reality. It is the transmitter, the bridge between intention and expression. The Shamir, as a tool that makes divine will manifest in physical form, becomes a metaphorical analog to Yesod itself, a channel through which ineffable potential takes tangible shape. Furthermore, the symbolic architecture of the Shamir extends into alchemical traditions. In Renaissance Hermeticism, the idea of the lapis philosophorum, the philosopher's stone, functions as a universal solvent and perfecter of matter. Like the Shamir, the philosopher's stone is often said to transmute without destroying, to purify without fire. The stone's rumored ability to write upon or transform base metals into gold parallels the Shamir's capacity to inscribe upon stone without damage. Both serve as metaphors for spiritual perfection, tools that enact divine will without coercion, emblems of transformation through harmony rather than force. Taken together, these linguistic, symbolic, and cross-cultural threads reveal the Shamir as far more than a relic of Jewish myth. It is a spiritual cipher, an idea that transcends form, recurring in traditions that grapple with the mystery of divine creation. Whether in the inscriptions of a high priest, the architecture of Solomon's temple, the command of jinn, or the transmutation of alchemical matter, the essence of the Shamir endures. In this light, the Shamir invites us to consider a radical theological proposition, that the highest form of power is one that leaves no trace of violence, that the deepest form of knowledge is etched not by force, but with understanding. It is, in every sense, a symbol of creation as communion, not domination, and of transformation that respects the integrity of what it touches. If the Shamir's narrative origins ground it in sacred history and its linguistic structure casts it as a conceptual paradox, then its symbolic resonance completes its theological significance. For the Shamir is not merely a relic of sacred literature or the embodiment of a divine tool. It is a metaphysical principle in miniature, revealing how the divine manifests, transforms, and ultimately withdraws. Having explored its role in construction and inscription, the Shamir's symbolism points us now toward the deeper, often unseen mechanisms of divine interaction with the world. Its function, to shape without striking, to the cut without contact, places it within a unique metaphysical category, that of transformational presence. It does not coerce, it harmonizes. It does not obliterate resistance, but rather renders resistance irrelevant. In this, the Shamir becomes an emblem of divine action that is both exacting and compassionate, an operation of pure will unmediated by violence. This symbolic function is further clarified by the Shamir's disappearance following the destruction of the temple. It was not destroyed, it did not fade, it ceased. Its purpose complete, it was no longer necessary. Here we encounter one of the more challenging concepts in spiritual philosophy, that sacred tools, like sacred roles, exist only as long as the moment requires them. This is not an argument for impermanence as erasure, but for teleology, purpose as destiny. The Shamir's withdrawal reflects a larger principle that permeates mystical traditions. Divine tools are never ends in themselves. They are vehicles of the sacred will, present only while that will is active. This echoes a motif found across spiritual cosmologies, the motif of concealed holiness. In Hasidic thought, holiness is often hidden to protect it from misuse, or to challenge the seeker to rise to its level. The Shamir was wrapped in barley, wool, and lead, not because it was weak, but because it was too strong to be encountered directly. This concealment mirrors the concept of Tzimtzum, God's self-contraction to allow space for creation. The divine hides not out of absence, but to make presence possible. The Shamir, then, is not merely a contained power, it is contained precision. It illustrates a mode of sacred action that is characterized by restraint, intentionality, and respect for the integrity of the created world. It reveals that creation need not be an act of rupture. It can be an act of alignment. This alignment extends even into the psychological and philosophical spheres. In spiritual anthropology, the human soul is often imagined as a microcosm of the cosmos. Just as a Shamir shapes stone without breaking it, so too must spiritual development reshape the self without shattering it. The Shamir becomes a metaphor for inner transformation, the quiet work of grace, the slow etching of wisdom upon the hardest parts of our being. Moreover, its invisibility and minuteness remind us that sacred power often operates in forms we overlook. Its lack of spectacle stands in deliberate contrast to the thunderous theophanies of Mount Sinai or the dramatic miracles of Exodus. The Shamir's miracles are intimate. It reminds us that the divine does not only break seas apart or send fire from heaven. Sometimes it just writes, quietly, precisely, into the stone of the world. As such, the Shamir becomes a metaphysical template for how we might engage in sacred action, not by asserting dominance over the world, but by learning to read its grain, to move with it, to transform it not in opposition, but in cooperation. Its very nature teaches that the highest power is the one that respects form while revealing purpose. In this way, the Shamir reaches far beyond its origin in Jewish tradition. It becomes a universal symbol of divine agency, silent, purposeful, restrained. It is a theology of subtlety, a philosophy of precision, a spirituality of presence. And in its absence, it continues to speak not of loss, but of completion. The Shamir is more than a mystical creature. It is a metaphor for divine intervention in human creativity. It challenges our assumption about force, transformation, and sanctity. Whether as a lens of nonviolent engineering, a symbol of liminality, or a vessel of sacred narrative, the Shamir invites us to rethink what it means to build something holy. From rabbinic parables to esoteric grimoires, the Shamir has cut its way, silently, miraculously, through religious history. In a world obsessed with spectacle and scale, the Shamir reminds us that true power often lies in the invisible, the restrained, and the sacredly small.